Masechet Nazir Daf Chet. With this daf, we complete the first perek. We saw most of this Mishnah already discussed in the previous daf, so it should be familiar. Mishnah: Hareni Nazir kis'ar roshi v'cha'afar ha'aretz u'chol hayam. Hareze Nazir olam u'megaleach achat lishloshim yom. Someone says, I am a Nazir like the number of hairs on my head, or like the dust in on the land, or like the sand of the sea. Well, that's a big number, uncountable, and that person will be a perpetual Nazir forever, which means each hair will represent one Nazir period of 30 days, and so he'll have to do 30 days, then he can shave, bring his korbanot, and immediately fulfill another 30 days continuously on and on for all of his life. רבי אומר, אין זה מגלח אחת ל30 יום, ואיזה מגלח אחת ל30 יום האומר, הרי עלי נזירות כסער ראשי, וכעפר הארץ וככל הים. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi disagrees with Tanakama, even though it's true Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the compiler of the Mishnah, but he also includes himself and quotes other opinions in the Mishnah, even anonymously here. So this is a very interesting Mishnah to have a machloket between the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and a Tanakama. In any case, Rabbi says, no, someone who says, I am a Nazir as the hair on my head, then he cannot shave once every 30 days. Rather, he would have one long Nazirut period of the number of hairs on his head, or sand, or dust, which is still a huge number. So he'd still be a Nazir for a very long time. If he says sand, that's going to be his whole life. So he's still a Nazir for his whole life, but it's one continuous Nazirut period, which is in many ways much harsher because he can't take a break. He can't even shave in the middle. He can't shave at all. This is not like Nazir Olam. Someone says, I'm going to be a Nazir Le'olam, or Nazir Olam, then he's a Nazir like Avshalom, but he can shave every year. But this person would be one long, not be able to be a Nazir. Although it would be financially better because he doesn't have to pay for korbanot every 30 days, which according to Tanakama, he would. Okay, but according to the B, in what case would it be a unlimited number of 30-day Nazirut periods? That would be if he says, I take upon myself Nazirot, right, Nazir obligations according to the number of my head. Then that clearly means multiple individual Nazirut obligations, each one 30 days, and so that would be the case where he can shave every month. Now, next case. Hareni Nazir melo habayit or melo hakupa bodkin otov. Someone says this ambiguous phrase, I'm going to be a Nazir in accordance with the capacity of a house or the capacity of a basket. So in that case, we ask him, what did you mean by that? Im amar achat gedola nazarti nazir shiloshim yom. If he says, I meant that I'm going to be a large Nazir, I'm going to be like we saw that formula above, a Nazir gedola. So he just means a standard 30 days. He calls it gedola because it feels like a really big deal for him. But gedola is not a defined term, so it's just a subjective feeling. That's just 30 days. But when we ask him and he says, Vimamar setam nazarti, if he says, I didn't have anything particular in mind, I wasn't thinking about the size of a house, meaning big, I said the words, right? You take them according to their standard objective meaning. Well, that meaning would be, I am a Nazir according to the fullness of a house, meaning if you would fill up a house or a basket with some item, that number of items, that's how many times I want to be a Nazir. So in that case, well, he didn't say what he wants this basket to be full of, but we're going to interpret it in the most stringent way possible because, well, we don't know what he said, so we have to interpret it stringently. And we assume he meant a basket full of mustard seed. Mustard seed is really tiny, right? Here's some examples of mustard seeds. So a basket can hold many, many thousands and thousands of mustard seeds. So therefore, he's going to be a Nazir that many times, 1 month each, basically for the rest of his life. Okay, so you see this in this clause, it makes a big difference what he means by it. Now, usually a person's thoughts are not taken into account. It's only what you say. We take what you say, and when we think of the standard definition of what people think when they say that, right? And it can be a subjective definition, but it has to, it's the usual meaning of the words. It doesn't have to be the biblical definition, but the way people usually use it. In this case, however, we do ask him what he meant by it, because his words were so ambiguous, and it really could mean Melo habayit, as much as a house. Maybe he just meant, a big one. And in that case, we'll take his word for it, that what he had in mind when he said that was just a big one, that's 30 days. But if he doesn't clarify clearly that that's what he meant, then we take it at face value, in which case it means the number of the amount that you would need to fill the house or a basket, and that would be with what we don't know, we assume mustard seed, and therefore he's going to be a Nazir for his whole life. Next case, Hareni Nazir mikan ad makom peloni. We saw this case. Someone says, I'm a Nazir from here until Aleppo. עומדים כמה ימים מכאן עד מקום פלוני, אם פחות מ-30 יום, נזיר 30 יום. אם לאו, נזיר כמניין ימים. So we calculate how long would it take to travel from wherever you are until that place. And if it's less than 30 days, then he's going to be Nazir for 30 days, because you can never be less than 30 days. And if not, if it's more than 30 days, then he'll be a Nazir for that many days. If it takes 50 days, 100 days, then that's what we assume. Hareni Nazir keminyan yemot hachama, moneh nizirot keminyan yemot hachama. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ma'aseh haya kevan sheshlim met. Someone says, I'm going to be Nazir according to the number of days of a solar year. In that case, that's 365 consecutive Nazirut periods, right? 30 days each. That will be, how much? 365 months. That's about 30 years. So he's going to be a Nazir, one after another, for over 30 years. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says, this is Rabbi Yehuda, the fourth generation Tana, not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He says, this in fact happened. There was a person that took upon himself that he's going to be a Nazir according to the number of days in a solar year, and he did. He fulfilled his Nazir periods for 365 months in a row, and he completed them, and right after he completed them, he died. Maybe he got some extra life out of it because he made such a promise, and so Shamayim granted him that he would be able to live until the end. But yes, he did in fact do this. Okay, according to the story that Rabbi Yehuda recalls. All right, that's the Mishnah. A lot of cases, but we analyzed most of them already, so we're going to still analyze some of them. So once again, if someone says, I'm a Nazir according to the capacity of this basket, so he doesn't say the capacity of what you're filling it with. We assume the most stringent, that you're going to fill it with something tiny like mustard seeds. And we ask why? Why do we have to assume it's something small? Why not assume it would be full of cucumbers or gourds, which are pretty big? How many gourds fit into a basket? 10. Okay, so let him have a remedy. So he'll be a Nazir for 10 times, 10 30-day periods, and then he'll be done in less than a year. So why not help the guy out and assume a more lenient interpretation? Why are you taking such a strict interpretation upon him? Amar Chizkiya b'machloket shenuya v'Rabbi Shimon hidamar adam machnis et asmo lidavar shesefeko hamor mivadai. Chizkiya says, this Mishnah this law would be subject to a machloket, and our Mishnah that says we assume him stringently mustard seeds. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says a person would place himself into a matter of doubt, even though that doubt could possibly be much more strict than something that he said with certainty. Right? If you said with certainty what it is, apples, gourds, right? Then it would be lenient. But if a person is vague, what does a person mean when he's vague? Now remember, like all Nidarim, Nazir also depends on what a person has in mind. So this is really a psychological question of when people say something vague, do they assume that should it turn out that we don't know for sure what he meant, and he doesn't clarify it, should we assume that people would say something and put themselves into doubt that would be very stringent? Or should we assume that people, if they put themselves into doubt, wouldn't want it to be understood in a lenient way? That's going to be a machloket that we're going to see in the following Baraita. Anyway, Rabbi Shimon is going to say that, when a person says something that's vague and subject to doubt, people do assume that, they may mean the most stringent interpretation. And that's why this person, who for whatever reason said, I'm going to be a Nazir, like the contents of the basket, since this is doubtful what he meant, yes, if we follow Rabbi Shimon, we're going to treat it according to the most stringent interpretation, which is the tiniest thing we can think of, which is a mustard seed. All right, now let's see this machloket in its original context. Tanya, Hadeni Nazir Amanachi Hebekrize Me'akor. Ve'alachum so shenigdav o she'avad. Rabbi Shimon oser shesafek nazirut lehachmir. Someone said, I will be a Nazir if this pile of grain has 100 cord. It's like making a bet with someone, right? And someone says, I think this is more than 100 cord. And the other person says, no, it's less than 100 cord. You know what? I'll even make you a bet. If you're right, I'll be a Nazir. Okay, so it was presumably the person doesn't want to be a Nazir, so he thinks that it's less. All right, so now they're going to go and count, and they'll actually see, and they'll measure how much it is. So the guy goes and counts, and when he gets there, he sees that this pile of grain that he had seen earlier was stolen or lost. And now there's no way to check whether he has to be a Nazir or not. So what should we assume? Rabbi Shimon says he has to be stringent upon himself, because we assume that when he makes this vow of Nazirut on some condition, that should there be a doubt, that he would want it to be understood stringently. He doesn't have to say it explicitly, but that's the assumption we have in mind, that people would put themselves into a doubt, even though they would have to take upon themselves that obligation in the strictest possible manner. Because he says, Safek Nazirut le'achmir. Anytime you're not sure, we're going to be stringent about it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda matir shesafek Nazirut le'hakel. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that, no, he's okay. If you lost or was stolen and you can't tell whether the condition was fulfilled or not, we assume in a lenient interpretation. And so if he's not sure if he's a Nazir or not, he's lenient, and he will not be a Nazir. We assume that if we would ask him at the time that he made a Nazirut, listen, if it should turn out that you can't figure out whether the condition is fulfilled or not, you're in doubt, would you want to be a Nazir? If we assume that people would say no, then that's why we understand it leniently. All right, so now that we know that machloket, Hizkiah answers the question and says, how come in the Mishnah we assume a stringent interpretation that it's full of mustard seed, and not that he meant that it should be full of gourds? Rabbi Hizkiah said this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says we follow things in the stringent interpretation whenever there is a doubt. All right, so that's Chizkiah's answer, that this Mishnah is only Rabbi Shimon. However, there is another answer. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda. I don't want to restrict the Mishnah to be only one opinion. I can explain that this Mishnah also is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who just said that we interpret things leniently. Hatam la nachet leninzirut. But there's a difference between the two cases. In the case where he says, I'm going to be a Nazir on condition that there's 100 cord here, then we're not sure whether he is a Nazir at all or not, right? If there was 100 cord, he would be a Nazir. If there was not 100 cord, he would not be a Nazir. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. We're in doubt whether he should be a Nazir or not. We assume leniently he's not a Nazir. Whereas here, for sure this guy is going to be a Nazir. He said, I'm a Nazir according to the contents of a basket. So he's at least a Nazir for, pick something big, watermelons, right? Okay, one watermelon, picks into the basket. So for sure he's a Nazir, for at least for one, if it's gourds, and for 10. So he's for sure a Nazir. The only question is, for how long is he going to be a Nazir? How many times? So therefore, even the Rabbi Yehuda would agree that he is a Nazir. We have to treat it stringently. He was only lenient if it's possible he won't be a Nazir at all. But here he surely is a Nazir. So how can we remove him from being a Nazir? He already is a Nazir, and then once we know he's a Nazir, so we have to treat it stringently in terms of the length of how long he will be a Nazir. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yehuda. He says, yes, our Mishnah can even be Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. And now we challenge that. And it says, Amayla lehazya lekupa ki'ilu mela'akishu'in udlu'in v'tebe letakanta. Why not say that, okay, we'll assume leniently that the basket is full of gourds, and there's 10 gourds. So fine, he'll be a Nazir 10 times 30 days. And then at the end of that, now let's help him out and assume they're gourds, so he doesn't have to be a Nazir again, rather than that they're mustard seeds that he has to accept upon himself many more Nazir periods. In other words, this is also a case of is he going to have to be a Nazir, yes or no? Right, yeah, for sure, everyone agrees he'll be a Nazir 10 times. Okay, that's even according to a lenient interpretation. But then the next one, afterwards, should we assume he meant gourd, and then he's done, he's not a Nazir at all, or mustard seeds, and then he does have to take upon himself yet another Nazirut period. So it does boil down into a case of yes or no, is he a Nazir or not a Nazir at all? And in that case, you agree that Rabbi Yehuda would say, we follow the lenient opinion. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda should say, in this case in the Mishnah, that he should be a Nazir only according to the number of gourds. So sorry to be Yochanan, but you did not successfully explain this Mishnah according to the Yehuda. But then the Gemara answers, Ha-sakadatin nizirut hu dekabel ilaveh. You were thinking that he accepts upon himself nizirot, multiple periods of being a Nazir. And that's why you asked the question of Yochanan, because, okay, he finished 10, and now the next one, will he be a Nazir, yes or no? And that's why you didn't understand Rabbi Yochanan correctly. But actually, the Rabbi Yehuda Sabala Kirabi, Rabbi Yehuda of the 4th generation actually agrees with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi of the 5th generation. I know that's out of order, but the point is that he doesn't actually have to even know what Rabbi said, but he already says the same thing even before Rabbi ever said it. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with that view. The view in the Mishnah, in the beginning of the Mishnah, Ditnan Rabbi Omer, Enze megalech achat l'shloshim yom, ve'eze hu shemegalech achat l'shloshim yom, ha'omer harei alai nezirot kis'ar roshi ve'chavar ha'aretz u'chechol hayam. Rabbi at the beginning of the Mishnah said, if a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir like the hairs of my head, then that's one long Nazirut, according to the number of days, equal to the number of hairs on his head. He only separates into separate Nazirut periods if he said, I take upon myself Nazirot, like the hair on my head. And therefore, if Rabbi Yehuda agrees with this very same opinion, then here also, when a person says, I'm going to be Nazir like the fullness of this basket, then we take that to mean one long Nazirut period, according to how many things are in that basket, not separate periods. And therefore, since the person said one long period, so for sure he's going to be a Nazir, no matter what. Even if it's gourds, even if it's watermelons, right, is going to be a Nazir at least for something, at least for 30 days, even if it can only hold one watermelon or 10 gourds. It's going to be the minimum number of 30 days. So you see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, now that we established Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi, When he says, I'm going to be a Nazir according to the fullness of the basket, he for sure is a Nazir. No question about that. The only question is, for how long? Well, and once he's going to be a Nazir for sure, and the only question is how long, then everyone says you have to be stringent, because he didn't specify what item you're filling the basket with. So we have to be stringent and assume it's a tiny item like mustard seeds, and therefore he's going to be a Nazir. One Nazir period that's going to last many tens of thousands of days, according to the number of hairs or sand. And that's why our Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan explains, can be even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Because he is for sure a Nazir. If it's a question of am I a Nazir, yes or no, like when he makes the bet of how big the pile of grain is, then the Yehuda would be lenient, say, okay, you don't have to be a Nazir. But if you're going to be a Nazir, once you for sure has to be a Nazir, then everyone says you have to interpret stringently. Okay, good. So we have this second answer of Rabbi Yochanan. And now we're just going to question this assumption that we said, this possibility, if Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda, mi sabar la kerebi v'hatenan. Hareni nazir kiminyan mot hashana v'chule. The very last clause of the Mishnah said that if someone says, I'm going to be a Nazir like the number of days in a solar year, then he is in fact a Nazir 365 times 30. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the fourth generation Rabbi Yehuda, added to that a story. Now, when you add a story to a law, it probably means you agree with the law. So Maaseh vechevan shishli met. He says, yeah, well, there was such a case of such a guy who did that for over 30 years. He was a Nazir every 30 days, back to back. 365 times, and at the end he died. So what you see here is Rabbi Yehuda agrees not with Rabbi. According to Rabbi, if someone says, I'm going to be Nazir, according to the number of days in a year, then should be one Nazir period for 365 days, not 365 separate Nazirot. He didn't say Hareni alai Nazirot keminyan mot hashana. It should be one long one. And Rabbi Yehuda does not say it's one long one, because if it was one long one, what would be the big deal? Why would you tell a story? Oh, someone was a Nazir for a year and then he died. That's not a very long time to be surprised. 30 years, that is worth telling. So therefore, it does not look like Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi. Right? If you say that it's separate Nizirot periods that he accepted upon himself, then that's why Rabbi Yehuda told the story and said he fulfilled all of those and then he died. That makes the story make sense. But if it's just one period of 365, then is that a big deal of a completion? That he finished just one thing for 1 year? So that doesn't make sense. Ve'od. Furthermore, another reason why Rabbi Yehuda cannot be in agreement with Rabbi. That's one long period. V'atanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hareni Nazir minyan helkete chayitz uminyan shibole shemita moneh nazirot keminyan helkete chayitz uminyan shibole shemita. Here we have a braita where Rabbi Yehuda, the same fourth generation Rabbi Yehuda, says if a person says I'm going to be a Nazir according to the number of piles of figs left out to dry, or according to the number of sheaves that grow in a shemita year that are just left out for anyone to take. Some people read here shevile shemita, the pathways that all the people come in or coming into a field, because it's free for all, anyone can come. So people come from every direction. The point is both of these are unlimited numbers. And if someone says this, then he has to be taking upon himself Nazir periods of 30 days each, according to the number of piles or a number of sheaves, which is probably going to be a huge number, so he's going to be a Nazir for a very long time. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda says we interpret a big number as separate Nazir periods, not one long Nazirut. So it's clear that Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with Rabbi, right? And we answer, no, not necessarily. He could agree, because minyan shane, look in this case of Braita, We don't answer the previous question, but we answer this one. Hareni Nazir minyan. Since he added the word minyan, so that means a discrete number. That's why he is responsible for discrete Nazir periods of 30 days each in this case. But otherwise, if he didn't say the word minyan, yeah, he agrees with Rabbi that it would be one long period. So actually, we're good. Rabbi Yochanan is good. And it can be, this Mishnah can be Rabbi Yehuda. But then we reject this. Does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi himself make a distinction between saying the word minyan and not? In the following Braita, we see he does not make such a distinction. V'hatanya, hareni nazir kiminyan motachama, moneh nezirot kiminyan motachama, kimeh halevana, moneh kimeh halevana. Rabbi omer, ad she'omar nezirot alai kiminyan motachama, uchminyan mot halebana. This has a Tanakama, where a person says, I'm going to be nazir according to the minyan, according to the count of the number of days of a solar year, or according to the count of the number of days. So then he's going to be 365. Or he says according to the number of a moon, so then he'll be separate Nazir statuses, periods, 30 times the number of days in a lunar year, 354. Okay, so in this case, he says the word minyan, and Tanakama says that's separate Nazir periods. Rabbi disagrees and says, no, even if you said the word minyan, you would not have to have separate periods. It would be one long 365 or 354 long Nazir, one period. And the only time you separate it into separate Nazir periods is if he says, Nazirot alaik, I'm going to take upon the Nazirot according to the number of Yemot HaChama, like in the Mishnah where he made this same distinction. If he says Nazirot, separate Nazirot, like the number of days, then it will be separate Nazirot. But we see here that whether you say the word minyan or not the word, or you don't say the word minyan, makes no difference. It's still one long period. And so therefore, you can't say that Rabbi Yehuda is following Rabbi in saying that, oh, minyan over here, that's why, because he said the word minyan for the figs, that's why it's separate periods. No, Rabbi would say, even if you say the word minyan, it's still one long period. And a final answer to support Rabbi Yochanan is Rabbi Yehuda sabala kevate behada ufalegala behada. Rabbi Yehuda can agree with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in one matter and disagree in another matter. After all, he's actually lives before Rabbi, so he's not dependent on Rabbi at all. It just happens to be that he agrees with something that Rabbi later will say, and he doesn't have to agree with something later that Rabbi will say. So what does he agree with? Kabil ale ilave ufalig ale bechada deilu Rabbi Yehuda shane le moneh Rabbi la shane le moneh. So he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in one matter, that he is accepting upon himself one long Nazir status, but he disagrees because whereas Rabbi Yehuda, in the fourth generation, says if you say the word minyan, that's going to make it separate periods. Whereas Rabbi says, no, minyan or not minyan, minyan just means a count, and that would still be one long period. And so in the end, we have two explanations for our Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah assume stringently that that when he says a basketful, he means mustard seeds? One opinion is, the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who always interprets doubts stringently. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it can even be Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda only interprets things leniently if it's a question of whether he's going to be a Nazir at all. Then we assume he's not a Nazir. But if he's for sure going to be a Nazir, and he is for sure because it's one long period that he takes upon himself, then the only question is, how long is his Nazirut? Is it going to be 10 days, 30 days because of gourds, or is it going to be thousands of days because of mustard seeds? In that case, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that you have to treat it stringently, and that's the final explanation of our Mishnah. Okay, now that we explained that, we're going to just quote a couple of Baraitot. Tanur Banan, Hareni Nazir Kol Yemei Hayai, Hareni Nazir Olam, Harezen Nazir Olam. We also saw this Baraita. Someone says, I'm going to be a Nazir all the days of my life, or forever, then he is a Nazir forever. The technical type, like Avshalom, who is a Nazir for his whole life, but can cut his hair when it gets too heavy about once a year. Afilu me'a shana, afilu elef shanim, and ze nazir olam, ela nazir le'olam. But if a person said, not forever, or all the days of my life, instead he gave a number, even if it's a big number, 100 years, even if he said 1,000 years, still 1,000 years is not the same as forever. And therefore, that person is not a nazir olam, like Avshalom, but rather a regular nazir. Le'olam happens to be forever, and therefore he can never cut his hair. So this guy's he's going to have a pretty hard time. Next baraita, tenur banan. Hareni nazir ve'achat moneh shetayim ve'od moneh shalosh ve'shub moneh arba. If a person says, I'm going to be a nazir and one, well, then that counts as two, because the words Hareni Nazir, that's already 30 days. When he says and one, so he's adding and another Nazir another Nazir period, so it's two. If he says Hareni Nazir ve'achat ve'od, so the word ve'od is adding yet another one to that. If he says Hareni Nazir ve'achat ve'od ve'shuv, and again, so then that's four. So every word that he says is adding another Nazirut. All right. Now we ask, Peshita, isn't this obvious? Like, what is this teaching me with all these examples? I might have interpreted as shuv means once again, repeat. Repeat what? Maybe it means repeat everything that just came, so that did before. So when he says Hareni Nazir ve'achat ve'od, that's three. And I might have thought when he says veshuv, that's multiplying those three by two. In other words, repeat all those three, which would end up with 6. And therefore this Baraita says, no, don't think that. The veshuv is only going on one of them, right? I'm going to be a Nazir one more time, so therefore it's only 4 altogether. Good. Tedona banan, Hareni Nazir. Sumchos omer, hen achat, digon shetayim, terigon shalosh, tetragon arba, puntigon hamesh. Okay, hope you remember some of your geometry, because here we're quoting a whole bunch of Greek words. Remember, a lot of people spoke Greek. Even in the land of Israel, which where the language of the eastern half of the Roman Empire, the common language was Greek, and many Jews also spoke Greek. And so here we're quoting some statements that people would say. A person says, "I am a Nazir," and then he adds the word "hen." That means one in Greek. So in that case, he's one Nazir. Good. If he says digon, which means two, like die, right? Die, even in English, is a prefix that means two. So then he's going to be a Nazir twice. If he says trigon, similar to the English word triangle, tri just means 3. Trigon or trigos means 3 times. Hareni Nazir, trigon, right? 3 times. I'm a triple Nazir, then he's a Nazir for 3 time periods. If he says tetragon, like we know, like we use a quadrilateral tetra means 4, and so that means a 4-fold Nazir. If he says puntigon, like pentagon, doesn't mean he's going to be the shape of a pentagon. He means a 5-time Nazir. Then he is in fact a 5-time Nazir. Okay, so you see, you learn even Greek numbers and different geometrical shapes and their names. That's also included in Daf Yomi. Tanura Banan. Similarly, this is a separate halacha, but it has a similarity in terms of the shapes. This is a halacha that has to do with sarat of a house. Sarat of a house only applies to a house with 4 walls, not any other shape. We'll see why. Bait agol, if someone has a round house, right? It's circular. Digon, or a 2-sided house. How could you have a 2-sided house? I don't know, maybe it just has 2 walls and then the rest is empty, or has 2 walls and the rest is rounded. so it only has, anyway, two straight walls, or trigon, or a triangle house, or puntigon, or a pentagon-shaped house, eno metame bin ga'im, that even if there's mold on the wall and it looks the same as a sarat, that's not considered halachically to be a nega. Tetragon mitame bin ga'im, but if it's a quadrilateral, four sides, then it can become tameh. My tama, what's the source? Lemata hu omer kir kirot, lemala hu omer kir kirot, hare kan arba, in the Vayikra, Perek Yudalid, which gives all the laws of Sarat HaBayit. It says kirot, plural, where it could equally say kir, just one, and it does that twice. So each of them is, since it's plural, is two, and it says it twice, that's four, and therefore, and the word is for walls, so since it has this word for walls, twice times two, so that means four walls. If your home has four walls, then it's subject to the problem of sarat, but any other number would not be nega habayit. Hadran alach kol kinuyeh.